Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this seminar this afternoon. It is a pleasure to see you here. My name is Christian Fischer. I'm director of DIIS, and we don't have a great number of physical seminars these days for obvious reasons. So it's very good to see you have come to attend this seminar, and also a special welcome, of course, to the many people who are following us on the online transmission. It is really a good idea to have this seminar. The idea came up in a conversation with Rob, the Dutch ambassador to Denmark. Rob Sackman, who came up actually with the idea that we should have a seminar after the US elections on the development of the European defense dimension. And we said that's a great idea, and since that we work together with you, it is a pleasure working with you and with your embassy, Ambassador. Thank you for that. And many here who are here, and those who are also following us on the web-based transmission, have seen that we last year produced at these, together with a number of researchers from other research institutions in Denmark, we produced a report on the Danish opt-out and European defense cooperation. And we are delighted to see that this created quite a bit of recognition in Denmark. It has also been translated into English, but it was very well received, very professional information as we read the reactions to it. It had 4 scenarios in it, and one very important aspect in guiding what these scenarios was, of course, the outcome of the American presidential election. And if you have seen it, this report, it had a scenario 4, which said that where we expected a transatlantic stabilization. And therefore, this timing of this seminar was planned in order to have that outcome of the U.S. elections. And even though we do not have the final results, as far as I know, then we have a pretty good picture of even though there hasn't been this concession yet, and even though we do not have the result of the Senate, we have a pretty good idea where we will be heading. And therefore, we have almost an ideal platform to have this discussion on the way ahead for European defense cooperation. And we have asked a slightly provocative answer: geopolitical ambitions versus reality? Question mark. I'm sure that is going to lead us to some very lively discussions today. And we are really fortunate to have great speakers, and we have great moderators, and not only from Denmark, but also from the Netherlands, from Germany, from Sweden, from Finland, and from the EU. And we have deliberately tried to find a mix of policy people and researchers. That is a very good mix. And therefore, I'm sure that there will be plenty of food for thought for you and for me and for those who are following this perhaps later on when we put it on YouTube. There'll be plenty of food for thought and hopefully also inspiration in the deliberations we have this afternoon. I'm sure there's going to be a lively discussion. I will end now, but before we start the rest of the program, which will be introduced by senior researcher Felicia Stockholm Banke from DIIS, then we'll give the floor to Rob. Please, Rob, come and say a few words. And thanks for the cooperation.
Thank you, Christian. I can hear myself, so I assume you can hear me as well. The idea was born actually some 14 months ago when that's more or less when I arrived, and the first thing I did was attend a seminar under better circumstances here at DIIS, and this was in the run-up to the publication of the report which you just mentioned. So the first time I listened to Mikkel, for example, and I thought we should come back to this issue. And as you said, right now is the appropriate time. We too assume that Mr. Biden will become the next president of the United States. We already call him president-elect, and just today the foreign ministers of the 3 Benelux countries published an op-ed online setting out a number of priorities they wish Europe to work on together with President-elect Biden. So we are committed to this President Biden, so to speak. When I approached you were immediately very supportive, and we've had really good discussions with your staff as well. I'm also happy to note that when I approached my German and Swedish colleagues, they immediately said, yes, we will participate, because this is an important subject. The choice was made: Germany, President of the European Union right now; Sweden, a non-NATO country, but very active in European defense; Denmark, obviously, and I recognize Jürgen Gemmergård of the Udenrigs Ministerial should have a role here, and obviously, since the idea was ours in the first place, the Dutch perspective should also be presented. So we have this nice mix, which you already alluded to: objective, independent thinking academics, and representatives of governments presenting their government's view. That should not stand in the way of an open discussion later on when we move to the Q&A. And it's always challenging for policymakers to be confronted with other thinkers, but I think we can manage that. So I hope you will all enjoy this meeting, come away enriched, and I'm looking forward to the presentations and afterwards to the Q&A, in which you, the audience, can have your say and voice your priorities. Thank you so much again, Christian, for the cooperation and for providing the venue.
Yes, am I on? I think I am. Thank you so much, both to Rob and to Christian, and also to you for showing up today, being very courageous, daring. But it's very nice to see people, actually, and not only do online seminars. That's very nice. We hope that we very soon can get back to normal, so to speak. Yes, the title of this seminar is European Defence Cooperation, Geopolitical Ambitions versus Reality. Christian said that this was a bit provocative, and indeed it is. Because some of the questions that we raise in the introduction is this: whether the European Union's geopolitical aspiration is just merely a vague vision, or are they indeed realistic at all? Is it a realistic scenario? How do these issues affect European ambitions on increased European defence cooperation? And finally, because we are here in Copenhagen, and both Rob and Christian mentioned our Commission study, which we did last year for government, on European defence cooperation and the Danish opt-out on the same issue. Will Denmark have a significant role to play, or will the country, due to its CSDP opt-out, be put on the sidelines? Of course, this is extremely important to Denmark. And to address these questions, we have gathered some of the leading academic experts in the field, as well as policy practitioners from Denmark or Germany, which currently holds the presidency of the EU Council, the Netherlands and Sweden, and also to discuss European defence cooperation in the light of the current state of affairs. Am I okay sound-wise? Yes. So personally, I would be very interested in a kind of more clear and straightforward answer, especially now, following the US elections, to the question about whether Europe is indeed moving towards strategic autonomy. And if this is the case, who are the main drivers here? Are there any drivers? Will we see less speed on the development of the common European defence and security policy, or will it be stagnation, as is indeed, or was indeed, one of our scenarios from last year's report? So let's begin and take stock, and we will do that with our speaker from Berlin. I hope we can kind of fly her in virtually. If Trine helps us. I can see Jana Puklerin on my screen, and hopefully you will be able to see her soon. Jana, can you hear me? See if we can hear her. There she is. We have Jana, Senior Policy Fellow from European Council on Foreign Relations, and we have Juha Jokala, Program Director from Finnish Institute of International Affairs. And first we will have our two speakers here, Jana, and then following will be Juha, and then we will have my colleagues Mikkel Runge and Christine Nissen, and they will be here. Actually, you're supposed to sit up there so people can look at you. So please join the podium. Jana, we will start with you. Taking stock, what is the status of the 2016 EU Global Strategy on Foreign and Security Policy? Jana and I, we just met a couple of weeks ago in Berlin, where I was actually able to travel to some weeks back. Jana, please. Are you okay?
Hello, my name is Jana Puklerin.
We need to.
Hold
on, we need to.
It's my pleasure to be with you today. Unfortunately, I cannot be present in Denmark, which I was really planning to do, but again, the pandemic prevented me from traveling. Unfortunately, due to technical problems, I could not hear what you were saying before I started speaking, and I cannot see you, so I just hope that this works now and whatever I have to say is somewhat interesting. So I was asked to speak about the status quo of the 2016 EU Global Strategy on Foreign and Security Policy. And I want to structure this in basically three parts. I want to talk about key achievements, outstanding issues, and basically trends that I think are not in the EU GS right now. So I start with key achievements. I think when we look at the EU GS, I think the key achievement is that it contributed to the boost of European defense and security policy in recent years. I mean, of course, it was not due to the EU GS only. Time was on the EU GS's side with Trump and Brexit back in 2016. And these events have made it all easier, but still I think the EUGS was and is still the vehicle through which the discussions took place, and are still taking place to this day. I think what the EUGS does is to capture an urgent need to revive CSDP and to kind of to put the D back in CSDP, the defense part. So I think that especially if we compare it to significant progress in recent years. Just to name a few, I mean, the EU activated the Permanent and Structured Cooperation, PESCO, and the European Defence Fund was set up, the CARD mechanism to coordinate national defence planning better. And I think overall, kind of that basically lays the ground for the European Defence Union that was also recently mentioned by President Macron in his interview. So of course, I think we still need to work on these initiatives' cohesion and coherence. We need to link these pillars better, but overall, I think a lot has been achieved. And especially the EDF to me is kind of like a small revolution because the Commission has changed its approach to kind of the dirty defense topic. And I think this is not least due to the European global strategy. Of course, there is still a lot to do. Just today, I heard that talks about the European Peace Facility had stalled again, and so that there is no progress. Although I think Mogherini's idea is an excellent one, and we urgently need such a peace facility. I think what we've also seen through the EUGS is a boost for cooperation between NATO and the EU. Of course, there is a lot of criticism about the PESCO projects specifically, that they are too isolated and that they need to be better aligned with the EU level of ambition more broadly, and that they don't really contribute to the capability gaps that exist. But still, I want to start here kind of on a positive note. So, and also I don't want to forget civilian CSDP, because I think we have seen huge progress there with the civilian compact, especially in 2018 and afterwards. That, of course, I have also high hopes for the strategic compass, especially for the second part of it, for the 4 baskets, and that kind of we will have more clarity about kind of the most important thing. And I think that is also the biggest problem with the EU GS, or where it failed to really clarify things. I think there is still a lack of understanding what kind of security and defense actor the EU actually wants to be, which is a quite fundamental question. So about the level of ambition and about what we want to do alone, if necessary, as the European Union. And you see that all over the place when it comes to now. I've been working a bit on the resilience basket from of the strategic compass, and there is a heated debate between member states about kind of Article 42.7, the European Mutual Defense Clause, and how it relates to NATO's Article 5. And you see this tension all over the place. So that's why I hope that the strategic compass will contribute significantly. What we've seen recently is kind of a new battle about the term strategic autonomy, especially between Germany and France. So it's still a very divisive term, and I think the whole battle shows my previous point, that on the very idea what kind of actor the EU is and how this relates to NATO and the United States, and kind of the European pillar in NATO needs urgently to be defined. So one could also say that when we look at the status of the EUGS, that kind of we can be critical and say it's too little too late, and that there is still this gap of ambition and willingness. And I think if we continue to focus on kind of the terms like strategic autonomy, then kind of the narcissism of our small differences will prevent us from looking at what we really want to achieve, and that we have a lot in common, and that we need to focus on this. I think on the open questions and the outstanding issues, I think the EUGS fails to give a really good answer how to include the UK now in the overall picture. And I know that this is terribly complicated. But still, I think we need to have an answer here, and the EUGS is not enough. Same with these coalitions of the willing that have been popping up in the last years in European defense, like the European Intervention Initiative. So how are initiatives like these, kind of how do they relate to the EU initiatives, and how to link basically CSDP and bilateral or regional cooperation better. But I hope that we will reach progress here. And as I said, the strategic compass can also give us some guidance, and at least we now have a regulation for third-party participation in PESCO. I think I'm already running out of time, so just one more minute. So I think what the EUGS does, and looking a bit beyond defense, I think what it did beautifully is kind of to really re-emphasize kind of the need to uphold multilateralism and to reform global governance. The strategy has acknowledged that the current configuration of global governments is under great threat, and that strong action is necessary from the EU's side. And I think it really has hit a nerve there. And two wishes, so what are the two biggest flaws that I see right now is that we need to find an answer to kind of the strategic shift in US security and defense policy beyond Trump. Now with Biden, I think we will see a revived transatlantic relationship, but beyond Trump, the structural shift, the pivot to Asia, and what that means for us Europeans and how to adjust, I think that's not in the EUGS. That is kind of the most crucial question to me. And the second one is really kind of the UK question and how to to link the UK closer to the EU's efforts and how to find means. And that means for me that the EU needs to become more flexible, especially when it comes to non-EU but European efforts, driven mostly by the French. And with that, I think I leave it. And I hope you heard everything, because I cannot see you.
We actually did. You look great. I think that we could. You could hear her. You could hear Jana down there too. Yes, everybody is nodding. I think they appeared quite pleased. So thank you so much. And as I hear you, Jana, it sounds a bit like this global strategy needs an updating. And maybe we will have a global strategy to 21 to 22, perhaps. That's food for thought, and maybe a question we can discuss by the end of the second panel. So now we will move to our next speaker. I need to just one practical message here, which I did not bring forward, and that is if you plan to leave the room or stand, you need to put on your mask, and you know that, okay? So, please, Juha Jokela. It was a little bit like you got the question.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess it's now my turn.
Yes,
I
and you will talk about Brexit,
or see
right?
you, but I believe that I'm online. And thank you very much for this kind invitation to be in your seminar today. I couldn't also join you because of the travel restrictions also concerning the Nordic states. So it's a very shame that I cannot be in Copenhagen, which is one of my favorite cities. Thank you also, Jana, for your excellent presentation on the EU GS. And my task here is today to contribute on the discussion about what kind of challenges Brexit brings to the European Defence Cooperation. And you already mentioned that several times, so I'm very pleased to speak after you. I will use my 7 minutes to make 3 points. And the first one is that I'll give an answer to the question. In my view, the Brexit has not, at least yet, challenged the European Defence Cooperation if we define that broadly. That is more than just EU defence cooperation. I would also argue, then that's my second point, that Brexit has actually been one of the background drivers for deepening the EU defence cooperation, what Jana was mentioning already in her presentations. And then finally, my third point, I think where I can see the challenge, and this also relates very much to the previous presentation, is that there is uncertainty, especially in the terrain of EU-UK defence cooperation, what kind of forms that will take and how far that will reach in the future. And this is because I would argue that the UK current government has refused to discuss any institutionalized arrangements with the EU in the ongoing negotiations for future relationship. So very briefly, why I say that the Brexit has not at least yet challenged the European Defence Cooperation, I think I would like to take us quickly back to the year 2016 and the aftermath of the Brexit vote. I think it was the European Council meeting right after the vote which actually adopted the EU global security strategy, and that was the same meeting where the Brexit vote was also addressed and its implications. And I remember during that time that there were quite many concerns related to what the Brexit might actually mean for the broader European security and defense cooperation. And there were worries that could it actually signal a more broader decoupling of the UK from Europe, and perhaps even UK isolationism, as the kind of the Brexit vote delivered a very strong message from the UK electorate. Of course, today we know that this has not happened, and the UK has actually reinforced its commitments within the NATO. It has also deepened defense cooperation, also with no NATO members, such as Sweden and Finland, under the UK-led Joint Expeditionary Force, where also the Baltic states and the Netherlands are participating, as well as Norway. And as already mentioned, the UK takes part also in the new unilateral defense initiatives like the French-led European Intervention Force initiative. And I think there's also the question of where the UK defence policy goes in the future. And although there are all these economic constraints and also the kind of the worries that the Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic quite highlight those, we have, however, heard yesterday that the UK is very committed to its defence spending. And I think there are quite many expectations that the UK's integrated review of security, defence, development and foreign policy is ambitious also. But moving to my second point on the Brexit as a driver of EU defence cooperation, I think this is also something which would be nice to discuss with the audience today. I think it's fair to note that, of course, this EU defence cooperation, what Jana was presenting, it predates Brexit. So it was the European Council in 2013 which already had this item on the agenda. But it's true that it was 2016 and the global strategy where the priority really started to concretize. And I think this is very important because I think one of the background drivers was indeed Brexit. And the other one was, of course, the US election outcome a bit later, and also the uncertainties during the Donald Trump administration, which relates to the transatlantic security relationship. I think this is quite interesting in terms of the EU's own development and EU defence policy development, because of course one of the arguments in the history has been that the UK has been the member state which has resisted that the EU moves forward in the field of defence. And now, of course, we've seen that the UK was a member until the February 2020, and it did not aim, I would argue, to lower the level of ambition with regard to the EU's defence cooperation. And of course, we also saw, at least temporarily, that the previous dividing lines among the transatlantist and perhaps the more European-orientated member states withered away, but they have been, I would argue, reappearing in the discussions more lately. But I think this is one of the interesting research questions for the future, what impact actually the UK exit had for the EU defence cooperation. And then moving quickly to my final point concerning to the challenges of Brexit with regard to the EU defence cooperation. And I would here argue that, what Jana already pointed out as well, that this is likely to continue despite any new emerging momentum for the transatlantic relationship in the field of security and defence. And I think it's important also to note that the EU defence cooperation in all of its forms aims to support, of course, the CSDP and the EU operations, but it has now more broader value as well, as seen by the member states. That is increasing the military capabilities also, which can be used in the other contexts, that's NATO or independent defense for those who are not members of the NATO. And I would argue that if the EU defense cooperation is destined to become increasingly a feature providing European security as well, the exclusion of the largest or the second largest military power in Europe constitutes a challenge for that. And this, of course, applies to the CSDP operations, but I think it will also apply for the broader features of the EU's defense cooperation, such as the defense industrial research and collaboration. And I would also argue that the prospects for the EU-UK defense cooperation have recently grown slimmer. It's not too far in history. I think it was 2018 when EU's chief Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier stated that a kind of a treaty on the security and defense, including foreign policy cooperation, could be signed very quickly after the withdrawal agreement was negotiated or it had been ratified. But what we now have witnessed, that there is a UK government in London which has actually not been willing to engage in any negotiations on those items, and prefers a kind of informal relations among the EU capitals rather than the EU's CFSP or CSDP. And I think this constitutes a kind of a challenge, even if the cooperation would continue among the main European capitals when we are moving from EU3 to E3 format on defense matters. Because if the UK will further drift away from the EU's defense cooperations, I think that's a kind of a obstacle, and it's also a kind of a challenge in terms of the EU's own development, because it is, in the end of the day, one of the major military security and defense actors in Europe. And I will stop here. I think I've managed to do it in 9 minutes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Juha. Thank you so much. You already talked about the transatlantic relationship, and that brings us to the next speaker, which is my colleague, senior researcher Mikkel Runge Olesen, who's who works on NATO mainly. And if I mute myself then and move, then Mikkel can take the stage.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Excellent. And nice to see so great a turnout. That bodes well for a good discussion. So I think that I might actually be the only speaker here today who's actually not been asked to talk primarily about Europe. Instead, I'm going to talk about transatlantic relations from Trump to Biden. And why is that, you may wonder? Well, ever since the founding of NATO, the sovereignty of large parts of Europe has been guaranteed by US military power. There are primarily two reasons for why this has continued to be the case up until today. First, if we take a look at the gross domestic product of some of the different parts of NATO, we can see that it's actually quite remarkable how close, if you compare the US gross domestic product with the Europe and Canada NATO pillar of NATO, it's almost identical. You can see as it progresses through the years there. So in economic terms, the US pillar of NATO is almost the same size. The US is a little bit bigger, but almost very insignificantly so, than the Europe and Canadian pillar of NATO. So, but of course, if we take a look at defense spending, the picture is quite differently. You can see that the US generally spends 2 to 2.5 times as much on defense as the NATO, Europe, and Canada pillar. And that's of course one of the reasons why in defense terms the relationship the transatlantic relationship is not exactly an equal one, and there's actually even more to it than just this figure, because the different NATO countries and European NATO countries and Canada spent money nationally compared to the US spending money as one actor. In terms of military efficiency, you might even argue that this difference is even larger than these numbers suggest. So. And then I move up onto the second point, and that is one of the reasons for why these factors remain the case today is that the presence of the U.S. security guarantee, it has a tendency to take the edge off any urgency to build up greater military capability by addressing these two issues, for example. And in this regard, it should even be remembered that even if Europe was to start spending the same as the US tomorrow, it would take decades for Europe to approach the US in terms of capability. So that sort of sets up the two sides of the transatlantic relationship as it stands now. So in short, the US security guarantee has a huge effect on the military thinking in Europe. Trump changed this mechanism in a big way. Already as a candidate, Trump expressed, you can see here, either the NATO allies pay up, including for past deficiencies, or they have to get out. And if this breaks up NATO, it breaks up NATO, right? He said that as a presidential candidate. It did not change when he got the presidency. Thus, in 2018, he tweeted from the NATO summit in Brussels that, see here, all NATO nations must meet their 2% commitment, and that must ultimately go to 4%. So now you might say that Trump did not, at least so far, he has 2 months left, but he did not, after all, pull the US out of NATO. Should we not look to US action rather than rhetoric? And this is of course true, but if we take a look at the trove of books coming out on the Trump presidency, if they are to be believed, and this includes 2 books by award-winning journalist Bob Woodward, there was a real fear on the US side that Trump just might one day do it. Maybe not pulling out actually that's kind of complicated in legal terms, and he would need backing back home, but suddenly one day just tweeting out that the US would be leaving NATO. This is something that people were afraid of. Because simply such a tweet would wreak havoc to NATO's credibility. Nevertheless, if we take the effect on Europe of the Trump presidency, and this approach has been substantial. If we take a look at defense spending as measured by percentage of GDP, we can see 2014 and 2020 compared here. And of course, it should be mentioned the Donald Trump effect arguably can't really be measured from before 2017, of course, right? So this is a bit of a mixture of the Donald Trump effect and of the Wales summit pledge to 2% effect, right? But nevertheless, if we take a look at the countries, every single NATO country, without I don't know what happened here, spends more on defense as a percentage of GDP in 2020 compared to 2014. And when you know how difficult it can be to get all members of the same club to do the same thing, I mean, this is really quite remarkable. And of course, it comes with all kinds of negative effects as well, right? The transatlantic bond has been having a hard time. Trust and solidarity between the allies have suffered under these conditions. But nevertheless, the fact remains that defense spending is definitely going up more broadly. Now, what does this mean for European defense cooperation? Quite a bit, I would argue, because I doubt that it is a coincidence that this talk about European strategic autonomy especially seemed to have gained traction during the Trump presidency, when this fear of US abandonment of Europe has been at its greatest. So what will happen under Biden? The US push for the allies to spend more will likely persist. But without the credible threat of actually leaving the alliance, Biden will likely not be able to push in the same way that Trump has been able to. And then what about EU defense cooperation and European strategic autonomy? The ironic point here is that the US is actually not necessarily all that happy about European strategic autonomy. If it means the Europeans spending more and taking upon themselves more of the alliance responsibilities, then of course the Americans are happy. But the Americans have also traditionally been uneasy about the term strategic autonomy because it seemingly implies the question, strategic autonomy from whom? Nevertheless, and perhaps even more importantly for European defense cooperation, without the fear that the US might leave, the acute need for European strategic autonomy may be somewhat lower, until, of course, that the US elects its next America First president. Thank you.
Perfect, Mikkel, thank you so much. So we will have our final speaker during this session, and that will be also a colleague, Christine Nissen, our expert on the Common Security and Defense Policy, EU, who will finish this panel, and then we have a short break. We are a little behind on time, but I think maybe we will have break like 10 to 2, where there will be refreshments outside. So please, Christine.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. I'll try to be very brief. As we can already tell from the excellent presentations that we have had until now, the EU's common security and defense policy is in a state of flux. And where does that leave Denmark, a small country with an opt-out towards much of this cooperation that has been initiated in the last couple of years? As such, I will not in my presentation focus on or provide an answer to today's question, to today's seminar, whether we have geopolitical ambitions versus reality on the European Defence Cooperation moving forward now with a new Biden administration. But I have been asked to give a talk under the heading "The Danish Defence Opt-out." How does that affect Denmark's defence cooperation within the EU? I will present some of the findings that we also reach in the white paper report that DIIS published December last year. So Denmark got an opt-out from the EU's security and defense policy in 1993 after the Danes said no to the Maastricht Treaty a year before. At that time, there existed no security and defense policy in the EU. But there was a fear amongst the Danish public that is still very much there, that the EU would develop into a supranational entity in the field of defense, developing an EU army where Denmark had to give up sovereignty in the field of security and defense. And when the EU then got a security and defense policy some years later, it was launched in a very different format than the ones that that many Danes feared. Instead of a supranational cooperation on defense, a European army, the EU launched a strictly intergovernmental framework for cooperation, where the member states remained very much in the driver's seat. And where cooperation was very much about conflict management outside the European borders rather than about traditional defense cooperation. When the EU then started to deploy military missions to conflict management missions outside the European continent, Denmark was, because of the opt-out, left out of these kind of operations. And as the years have passed, there's been an increasing number of examples where Denmark is excluded from participating in EU security and defense cooperation, including in particular the newest development on security and defense cooperation, for example, with the initiative on permanent structured cooperation that was launched a few years back. As something completely new, however, there are also a number of activities where Denmark can very much participate within the field of defense. For example, the defense fund that Jana mentioned as perhaps the most interesting aspect of the new cooperation on defense that goes on in the EU right now, because this is under the sort of competences of the EU Commission, and the opt-out, the Danish opt-out, only excludes Denmark from participating within the EU's intergovernmental common security and defense policy, the CSDP. That means that the opt-out is not an all-exclusive measure, and for the first time Denmark can actually participate in quite a lot when it comes to EU defense policy. However, one of the most sort of general, or perhaps the most overarching finding or implication of the opt-out that we found in our white paper was that the opt-out has created a certain mindset in Denmark. A certain mindset where politicians, policymakers, researchers, businessmen do not think about the EU when it comes to security and defense policy. We have been so used to having this opt-out. We have been so used to not thinking in EU terms when it comes to security and defense that this is the way that we go about things. When Jana talks very confidently about the new development that goes on right now with the compass, this is not a discussion that we have in Denmark as much. And the global strategy, of course, it is sort of amongst experts and policymakers, sure, but it is not a part of our sort of everyday talk in policy circles on security and defense. And that means also that Denmark is, what we have found in our white paper, that Denmark is losing influence when it comes to participating in the political processes of the EU on defense and security, either because we cannot be a part of it because of the opt-out, or because we spend a lot of energy, at least we have done until now. This can of course change. But we spend a lot of energy figuring out whether we can be involved or not. And the consequences has been also that Denmark has a fairly timid and neutral and passive role when it comes to influencing policy processes in the EU on defense. And the same is true for our European partners in terms of this mindset implication of the issue of the opt-out, that our European partners do not perceive Denmark to be a key ally when it comes to security and defense. That makes sense. We have an opt-out. And that means that this mindset is also extended to our European partners. Which we found from the white paper that we did, where much of the data was talks with policymakers from European capitals. A similar trend is also confirmed by a fairly recent study made by the European Council on Foreign Relations, where European policymakers were asked to list who they saw as their main partners when it came to European security and defense cooperation. And here Denmark ended up pretty far down the list across a number of categories, such as influence on European security and most responsive ally, shared interests, we're number 12. And in conclusion, because I have to finish soon, we can say that the opt-out does play an important role when it comes to fairly negative role when it comes to seeking influence within the EU framework on defense matters. But nevertheless, the Danish opt-out is also here to stay. At least for now, EU matters is not a very sort of popular focus point for voters, and politicians do not have the sort of best history in winning EU referendums where the public has had to say yes or no to more EU cooperation. But interestingly, we also very much find ourselves in a new situation where Denmark for the first time can participate in many initiatives on defense, since defense today is much more than strictly military engagement and traditional defense. And here Denmark, as we usually are, a very pragmatic and proactive ally, might be able to take on that agenda to a large extent. And on that fairly happy note, I will hurry and end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you to all the 4 presenters. We now have a 10 minutes break, and I should say that to those of you who are following us online. We will return 2 o'clock, There's a short break. Thank you so much for listening. And you need to keep your questions where we will have, by the end of second panel, we will have a Q&A session. So guard your questions and come back here. Return 2 o'clock. Thank you so much.
Policy presentations by EU member state capitals, namely the Netherlands, Denmark, Germany and Sweden. And they will be speaking to the question of future perspectives. What are the biggest threats and possible responses to European security? And we have 2 panelists that are joining us online from their respective capitals. I will briefly present them now. So we will start with the German position by Mr. Markus Volke, who's head of division at the Common Security and Defense Policy of the European Union at the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Then we will move on to Ms. Anna Blixt, who is head of division for CSDP and sanctions policy at the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then we will go here to the stage with Ambassador Rob Sagman, who from the Netherlands Embassy in Copenhagen, who will present the Dutch position. And last but definitely not least, we have Mr. Jørgen Gammelgaard, who's Special Representative for Euro-Atlantic Security at the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So each panelist has 7 minutes, consisting of 60 seconds each, for a presentation, so that we have nice time for discussion afterwards. So take note of any questions, then you can pose them either to the policy panelist or the academic panelist that we heard just now. And with no further ado, please take the floor, Mr. Volke. And I also have to say they're being guided because I can't hear me, so they're being guided in the chat. So if there's a bit of delay, that's why.
Hello, everybody. So this is Markus Volke from Berlin. I hope it's working fine. It's a little bit of a technical challenge here. I feel a bit like presenting like the weather forecast in front of a blue wall, and I don't see what I'm doing, but hopefully you can all hear me. I was not able to listen into all of what has already been said before, but most of it. So we all promised to be very brief. So the topic here is, say, threats and European solutions. As we're on open lines, I will not go too much into threats, but of course, threats we just presented in Brussels, a common threat analysis as part of the work on the strategic compass. And this as such is already a great step forward, which shows that we kind of work in the right direction. Just to say, I think we basically perfectly agree what the services have put together there. It's a very good, I think, start or a framework for our work, well, to identify those threats we face. And just, of course, to frame like the basic things. Of course, we're back to kind of global power competition. We face authoritarian systems around us that are on expansion, economically, socially, military. There are new technological threats, new weapon systems, hypersonic, others, of course, the whole cyber domain. So these are the things we face. Of course, in addition to the pandemic, climate change, and all the other kind of destabilizing factors we all knew. There have been, of course, these uncertainties in the transatlantic relation over the last years. Hopefully now, say, with the Biden administration, we will be to kind of a relaunch a bit on that. So, of course, if we say, what are the kind of solutions or responses we as Europe has to give to these challenges and threats? Of course, it's about EU, NATO, and there we have a kind of parallel process, which is really interesting. So we have this reflection process in NATO going on. I'm quite confident, or I expect in a certain way that there might be a new strategic concept launch next year. So we have this kind of thing going on in the NATO context, and we do the same in the EU context with the work on the strategic compass. And I think there as well, the image is quite nicely put. So it's a compass, so it should give us direction. So it's not something which is kind of it's not a cathedral or it's not a temple. No, it's something which is moving, and this shows everything what we do here is moving target. So our German defense minister just put it yesterday in a speech, or 2 days ago. She said, "Wir müssen europäischer werden, transatlantisch zu bleiben." So we have to become more European to stay transatlantic. What does this mean? We have to get more concrete. So for us, from a German perspective, so this strategic compass is the framework in which we hopefully can overcome this kind of ideological debates we had over the last years, and to really now work on concrete, pragmatic results and answers. So quickly, so the 4 baskets of the compass. So crisis management. So from our point of view, this means basically get honest with ourselves. So we have the headline goal process. We have this goal, 60,000 troops. Well, this does not reflect really the realities or the needs anymore. So what we should be able to do, say, is something like Barkhane. And what does this mean? So on an EU level or on an European level. And then you can derive quite easily lots of things from there on capabilities, etc. And of course, we should be able to have like more than one ship in Atalanta or in Irini. And so we need capabilities. So that's one of the next baskets. So we all know we need the strategic enablers, but there are as well new questions. For example, space. What about space? In space from a security policy or defense perspective. What will be done in NATO? What will be done on the EU level? And so there are new issues coming up. We should not forget as well, there's civilian, just to underline this very clearly. So crisis management and capabilities, it's well about civilian CSDP. I think there we are kind of on a good dynamic with the compact, the Center of Excellence. We will have on Monday the annual review conference. We are just preparing right now on the last steps. But there as well, we all together have to become kind of more strategic in our response. So then the new basket, resilience. And I think this is from our point of view, perhaps the most interesting one, as there we kind of introduce or have to find answers to this more kind of new threats, hybrid, cyber, disinformation, the new technologies, artificial intelligence. I already talked about space. And so there we get in areas where we as Europeans or as European Union, we should be courageous to develop ideas and answers. And because most of these issues, of course, this is not purely military. And this is where, at least to our conviction from a German point of view, the European Union can show all its force and its strength and its relevance, finding answers well over the EU toolbox to these issues. And there, of course, we tackle kind of new ground. So this will be an interesting journey over the next year. And then we get to the last part, partnerships. So this is, of course, we have the Brexit coming in, so it will be about some flexibility to find answers there. But of course, it's about EU-NATO. And at least from a German point of view, despite all the difficulties we know with Turkey, with things, we are kind of confident that we could perhaps get a certain relaunch as well on a political level. So there we need some political investment. I just say perhaps question on China. So how do we want to treat this? But as a lot of things, of course, in the EU-NATO context there as well, we have to be concrete, pragmatic, looking at things more from a grassroots level. And there I just want to hint at the kind of Presidency paper we prepared a couple of months ago. It was in the beginning of the year. So with the trio presidents, the Portuguese and Slovenian friends and Croatia, with some very practical examples or proposals, what we could do to kind of re-enhance and relaunch EU-NATO cooperation. And all things that have been proposed there are kind of still valid. And the last bit, perhaps capacity building. Of course, this is really for us an avenue for the future. So all the work we do right now to get the European Peace Facility up and running is so essential, of course, to add this important tool to our EU toolbox. I will stop here.
Thank you very much for that. And then we move straight on to Anna Blixt from the Swedish MFA, and she's also being guided via the chat, so she knows it's her time to speak. So there might be a slight delay.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this seminar. Like Marcus, I find it slightly strange not knowing exactly where to look because I can't see you, but I'll do my best. So really sorry I couldn't be there in person in beautiful Copenhagen, but thanks anyway. Well, I guess you've already spoken about the geopolitical landscape of today and tomorrow, about the return of big power competition, geopolitics, diffusion of power, the role of technology, lack of respect for human rights and democracy in many parts of the world. So I won't dwell upon that. And the threats that we face, of course, are many, but they are not new. What's new is the interconnectedness, the way that they blur borders between not just countries, but also internal and external security, the complexity and the speed of things. And when discussing threats and challenges, from a Swedish perspective, there's one word that needs to be at the forefront, and that is together. No country today is strong enough to face all the challenges and threats on its own, and we need cooperation. And that's why my country builds security in cooperation with others, with the EU, with the Nordics, as a partner to NATO, within the UN and OSCE. And about the OSCE, my foreign minister will soon take over as chairperson in office of that organization. And there are many challenges to European peace and security on that agenda. The ongoing pandemic has demonstrated how interconnected our world is, and it has put enormous pressure on our societies and impacted international cooperation. But it has also contributed to a new sort of sense of urgency about coming together and finding joint solutions. And in this changing security environment, the EU is more important than ever for Swedish security and prosperity. So EU integration, solidarity, and cohesion are national security interests for us. Unfortunately, we see centrifugal forces that risk leading to fragmentation and divisions, which can be seized upon by external actors who consider any weakness on our side to be in their own interest. And EU cooperation is, of course, central in upholding and defending the rules-based order. And the EU must continue to be a very strong advocate for multilateralism. And one of the advantages, just like Marcus mentioned, is, of course, the big toolbox that the EU has. And we need to use the tools that we have, diplomacy, sanctions, trade, development cooperation, and crisis management in an integrated manner to promote our interests. And Europe needs to shoulder greater responsibility for its own security and improve its ability to act. We need to strengthen the EU as a security policy actor, of course, with the EU global strategy at the core. And the EU must have the ability to conduct the whole spectrum of external crisis management operations, acting together with partners whenever possible, but on its own when necessary. And stronger national defenses and European cooperation in capability development will increase overall capabilities of EU member states. This will in turn then contribute to CSDP's operational capacity and the Union's ability to act. And of course, we welcome progress on EU defense initiatives like PESCO, CARD, and the EDF. And these are really important tools in strengthening European capabilities. I'm glad that Marcus mentioned the civilian crisis management, which is very important as well. It's a very significant way of contributing to international peace and stability. So the EU providing support to third countries' police, rule of law, civil administrations, etc. And Sweden, together with Germany and others, we have pushed for more capable, flexible, and responsive civilian CSDP. And just like Marcus mentioned, we are in the midst of implementing the so-called civilian CSDP compact, and we look forward to the annual review conference on Monday. The ongoing pandemic has accelerated many threats and challenges, and one of them being hybrid threats, which are intended to confuse and sow distrust and division. And these threats cut across internal and external security and are under the threshold of armed attack. And we need to improve our ability to detect these threats increase our resilience, and develop an effective toolbox to counter them. And there's a lot of work ongoing, not least within the EU. And related are, of course, technology and digitalization issues, which are becoming increasingly important for all of us, and also in security policy. And for the EU, they relate to many different areas as trade policies, the inner market, justice and home affairs, security, defense, and foreign policy. And the EU has the potential to be a leading actor in harnessing the benefits and handling the challenges of technology and digitalization. For us, it's important to place security and defense in a broader context that also includes technology and industry perspectives. Current technology development demands broad cooperation within the EU as well as with strategic partners. And we must ensure protection of critical infrastructure and key technologies without it leading to protectionism. And that brings me to the hotly discussed, debated issue on strategic autonomy, which to us should be a relative and not absolute goal for the EU. Focus should be on strengthening the ability to act by improving our decision-making and operational capacity, while ensuring the right of use of critical capabilities, not necessarily ownership. And increased autonomy should not be at the expense of partnerships. We need to deepen strategic partnerships with the UK, Norway, US, NATO, and others. And it's important that the European Defence Cooperation is also strengthening the transatlantic relationship. And lastly, I would not be a Swedish diplomat if I did not mention the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So when building security together, we need to involve everyone, including women and girls. And for us, our feminist foreign policy is at the cornerstone of everything. It's a cornerstone of everything that we do. And we need to implement the Women, Peace and Security agenda, not least women's participation in peace processes and political dialogue. And all of these issues that I've outlined is already part of the work on the strategic compass, which should steer our policies better and further with regard to security and defense. And the work should lead to more unity and a common understanding of the threats that Europe is facing, but also, like Marcus said, a common view and a roadmap on how the EU should respond to present and future challenges with both civilian and military needs. And with that, thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was spot on time, both presentations online. So now we move on to Ambassador Sackman. Please take the floor.
Again? Yeah? Am I online? Good. Thank you. Well, as you've heard, the world is a dark forest. And it's only by banding together that we can hope to get through it safely. Now, not that long ago, the Netherlands would have said NATO only. Not anymore. It's now both NATO and common security and defense policy, which is EU cooperation in the area of defense and security. To be sure, to us, NATO is still the indispensable cornerstone of security, in particular when it comes to the collective defense of our territory. And in order to show our commitment to NATO, also to convince our American allies that it's worthwhile for them to keep investing into NATO, it is paramount that European countries continue investing in capabilities, in commitment, in cash, and increase that even, as Mikkel has shown, the disparity between one side of the Atlantic and the other is just too great. And now we have President Biden, hopefully soon, accepted by everyone. But who comes after Biden? President Trump did have a lot of support as a candidate this time. It's almost half the US population, so we cannot be sure that American commitment will stay as it is. The Dutch have become much more ambitious when it comes to the European Union. We think the EU should have the resources, the will, and the conceptions to act independently, autonomously, in its own neighborhood. And that's where we see the term strategic autonomy, for us to be able, quite like what our Swedish colleague said, to operate better than we've been doing before. We have to remain realistic, however, about what the European countries, even together, can achieve. Again, I refer to Mikkel's presentation. Even if we start spending the same amount of money that the US is doing, from tomorrow we will be decades on before we can feel the same kind of capabilities at various levels. So there is no EU instead of NATO, there is both EU and NATO. And that also indicates one of the questions that was posed to all the speakers: how realistic are the EU ambitions? We're not there yet. Even if you take the EU global strategy and the Helsinki headline goal, where a number of concrete objectives were mentioned, number of soldiers to be deployed within a couple of days, we are falling short, far short of all those ambitions. So even to do what we already agreed to do, we have to up our investments. What do we need in order to move the process forward? One thing I would say is leadership within the group of EU countries. And there, and I'm looking to the German ambassador, we are looking at Germany and France in the first place. So two big countries within the European Union who have been the engine of so much development of the European integration process. But not just those two big countries. The other members of the European Union have a role to play there as well. And we, the Dutch, certainly are vocal when it comes to discussions in Brussels about these things. One country I should mention, which is not an EU country anymore, but which is still very relevant to European security, the United Kingdom. They may be reluctant now to enter into formal agreements with us or to even begin starting a talk about the future security relationship between the EU and them. But I think they will come around, because it's not just our security interests which would benefit from UK involvement. It's the other way around as well. And once the temperature has dropped a little bit, I'm pretty convinced that we will be able to explore fruitful cooperation with the UK as a European Union, because outside that there are a number of ad hoc arrangements which were already mentioned in the first panel, where the UK is fully involved, Denmark as well, the Netherlands as well. So leadership. What we also need is more of a common conception of what EU defense cooperation, security cooperation is about. We need to have an idea about what the threat is that we are facing. And if you're a Pole, you have a very different idea of where the threat comes from, principally, than when you're an Italian or a Dutchman, which we are at a place in Europe where we can hide behind Germany and Poland, where we can hide behind France and Italy. And that influences the threat perceptions in the Netherlands. Decision taking at the European Council level has to become much more efficient in order to be able to respond very quickly. And there I use one term, constructive abstention. Do we need everybody's positive vote to decide on operations? We think not. There are a number of steps which were already taken since 2016, the formulation of the EU global strategy. PESCO was mentioned, the European Defence Fund. There are other. First priority, get those things moving. Implement what we already agreed. Things like command and control, defense planning processes, improvement of interoperability and standardization. We have so many different weapons and weapon systems in Europe. It is inefficient. That's one of the big advantages of the US as well. Much fewer diversity. So there's a lot more bang for the euro to be had if we cooperate more closely. And there we think, in particular in the defense planning process, the coordination between defense industry initiatives, there's a lot to be gained. And we, for one, would like to see more mandatory coordination when it comes to that. I think I will leave it at that, and that should keep me within the 7 minutes. Thank you so much.
Excellent work. Thank you so much. And then I would like to ask Mr. Jørgen Gammelgaard from the Danish MFA to take the stage.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much to DIIS for arranging this, and certainly also to the Dutch ambassador and his embassy. From our side, this is very, very timely and useful. I'll try to address some of the questions that have been put to us, and basically deliver 4 messages. I am personally, and I think certainly from the Danish side, we are optimistic on behalf of what the EU can do. EU can deliver, not alone, but as an important player together with other organizations, other partners. We believe it is indeed very important to strengthen the role of the EU as security provider. At the same time, we believe that there's an important prerequisite. We need to focus on what makes real difference in real life and not symbolic gestures. That will be my second point that I would like to elaborate also on a little bit more. And then there was a mentioning of Denmark's role and whether, would we have a big role or a smaller role? I think, seen from our perspective, certainly the glass is more than half full and not half empty when it comes to the role of Denmark. On the way forward, it's about political will. It's about the political will to act. It's about the flexibility of the instruments that we have, and it's about EU-NATO cooperation when it comes to security. Others have already touched upon what are the kind of the challenges that we are up against, and it is very clear that the world is indeed changing. We see that new and old actors break international norms and rules. We see the great power competition is on, US, China, and Russia. So what really is the crux here is uncertainty and unpredictability. Those are the kind of the key words. And we need to cope with this, and it is clear that EU is key in handling this situation, seen from our perspective. So both the European Union and Denmark as such needs to have an active security and defense policy. And I think basically all agree that EU needs to take greater responsibility for our own security. But then coming back to the issue of symbolism, symbolic words on one hand and deeds on the other hand, that leads me a little bit to the issue of strategic autonomy, which is a case in point. The intentions might be good, but it kind of tends to send mostly the wrong signals. Strategic autonomy should not be an end in itself. The aim is indeed to have increased stability and security. It is the aim to make Europe stronger, more self-confident, as well as more capable of providing security for itself, for the citizens, and indeed also for our partners. It is absolutely crucial, seen from our perspective, that the concept of strategic autonomy does not detach us from our allies, but complement the cooperation with allies and the work of NATO. So it's not about flashing opposition to the United States. Sometimes you get the impression that that is a little bit behind some of the ideas in this area. It's not about signaling autonomy for the sake of autonomy or go it alone isolation. It's about doing in practice what is needed to make a difference on the ground. And building on this, what can sometimes erode the confidence in the European Union in the security and defense field is actually this gap that we see sometimes between the words and the deeds. And maybe the feeling that there's a almost impossible to understand bureaucratic process around this. I think those are some of the things that make it sometimes difficult for Danes fully to see what we are missing by having the defense opt-out. A few examples. I think there's a kind of a perceived at least inaction in relation to our neighborhood. We have the example of Libya, where, of course, we have in place the Operation Sophia and now Irini, but how much of a difference do we make on the ground? It took a very long time in relation to Belarus to agree to sanctions. The whole issue of Nagorno-Karabakh is also a place where the EU has not really defined a role. Maybe we do not have a role, but at least it's in our vicinity, and France is, of course, active and has been active. I think what we see is lots of plans and initiatives on some of these issue of security and defense, but maybe a little bit less action, and sometimes also in terms of capabilities, we see some many plans for this, but the real capabilities are not maybe that present. The issue of European Peace Facility was mentioned. Of course, it has now been under discussion for more than 2 years, and it's still not really in place. So that's another place where we need, more action and maybe less words. I think sometimes you kind of get the impression that there might be a almost inverse correlation between the number of bodies, institutions, and abbreviations in this area, and then concrete steps that matters in the field. But I will not just be negative and kind of a little bit skeptical. Certainly not. We have a number of good examples where things are working. We have the European Defence Fund. We have increased focus on resilience. It has been mentioned. We have military mobility, and thanks to the Netherlands, this is certainly moving forward very well. We have Frontex agreement with Turkey, strategic compacts, pass, and the threat assessment. We applaud Germany for putting this forward, which is indeed more kind of to the point and kind of less focusing on words but more on deeds. So just one word on the Danish position. I think again we believe that the glass is more than half full on the role that Denmark plays. I think we're quite active in the field of security and defense policy, despite our opt-out. And just to mention a few things, I think we are actually one of the countries that have been supporting the European Peace Facility, including the whole issue of lethal weapons. And we have had a very good discussion in our parliament on this issue. We have fully participated in the European Defence Fund, and we're very active also in the EU's civilian crisis management side. And I think sometimes it's forgotten a little bit. But on top of this, we are quite an active member of the French European Intervention Initiative. We have kind of in a coalition of the willing in relation to the Strait of Hormuz, and we are participating together with France in Sahel. So in many ways, on some of these issues, Denmark is actually on the sharper end of what is happening. So just to conclude on this, this is not that much about the instruments that we have in place. It's more about the common political will to use what we have to engage and take responsibility. And I think, at least from the Danish point of view, we try to do this, and in doing this, the transatlantic cooperation remains crucial. Thank you.
Thank you Can you hear me? Thank you very much indeed. All right, thanks so much. We now head on to the Q&A session, but before we do so, I think we should give a round of applause to the second panel. Ooh. So, I hope you have lots of questions. We will have the panelists online with us as well, but since they cannot hear, our good colleague Kasper is going to type the questions into the chat, and if they are supposed to answer, then they will do that. Is there anyone who would like to pose a question to the panel? And I need to say, just remind you again that seminar is live streamed. And when you have a question, please state your name and if you have an institutional affiliation, and then a brief question. And also please direct the question to one or more of the panelists. Yes, Christian would like to ask a question.
First of all, thank you for excellent presentations. I think it's really good that we have a very informed discussion about the word and the concept of increased strategic autonomy for Europe. One thing caught many things caught my ears this afternoon, but when Anna spoke about decision making in the EU, I felt a bit like wanting to be the devil's advocate here. We have within the EU probably in the neighborhood of 5,000 people out in missions. That includes both civilians and military. And I know that, and it's been like that for ages. It's been very difficult to resource these missions. The force commanders and the mission heads of mission, they keep asking for having the force requirements fully resourced. So that is one way of showing that how ambitious is Europe really when we can't even fully resource those missions that we have, which are at a fairly low scale. Then you may also add the issue of very strong disagreements of direction within the EU. Libya was mentioned. We have one EU member country which supports one faction in Libya. We have another member state which supports a totally different faction. So we have difficulties when it comes to decision making in the EU, and I wonder also if somebody would make comments about the flashy proposal by the French president of having a European Security Council. So it's a question which goes, of course, to Anna. What do you mean when you talk about increased decision making, better decision making in the EU? Rob was saying that it could be constructive abstention, but do you have other ideas?
Thank you very much. Is there another question before we move on to the answers? And they've received the question? Someone's going to say something.
Thank you. I think if I look at the chat, which I'm trying to follow together with the live stream, the question was about decision making and difficulties to find resources for the missions. Yes, that is a challenge, and if you have a smart solution, I wouldn't mind hearing it. There is the problem with force generation, and we are also discussing sort of how to deal with this. Should we do a force sensing in parallel with the discussions on mandates, etc.? This is one of the issues that will be, of course, involved in the work on and the discussions within the strategic compass. But yes, if the EU has a difficulty manning its missions, it's of course affecting its ability to act and its entire credibility. So I agree that it is a problem. Force generation is a bit easier when we look at the civilian missions, even if there are some challenges there as well. I think I will stop there.
Is there anyone else who would like to comment? Tivari. Excellent, Jana. Well, are there any questions, or may I abuse my role as chair for a moment? I was wondering, Ambassador Sagman, if you would elaborate a little bit on what you spoke about with constructive abstention.
Yes, thank you. There are missions which ought to be supported by all EU member states, but there are other missions in areas where a certain number of EU member states don't have an active security interest. And we feel it could be very helpful if such states then would excuse them from the decision taking, not because they don't want to support it, but because they don't have an active role and interest there, and leave it to the group of actively interested countries to take the decisions. That could speed up matters quite a bit. A further idea could have been qualified majority voting, but that would mean outvoting countries which are perhaps in active disagreement with what is being proposed. Libya was mentioned by Christian, and that might be a step too far. So let's first get used to not everybody participating each and every time, and then we can perhaps move on. Could I use this opportunity also to come back to the remark that you made, Christian, about the European Security Council? The point, of course, is President Macron is a highly intellectual politician, and French in general are like that. They have concepts, but not necessarily completely concretely formulated what they mean and what the objective is. Strategic autonomy was another thing. And right now, strategic autonomy means everything to everybody. So where do we find the consensus? That's one of the things that I mentioned when I said we need to have a better conception of what kind of security we want to achieve. European Security Council, if it means like the UN Security Council, just a couple of states deciding for the rest, then we are not in agreement. We want to maintain our sovereignty. We want to be able to decide whether or not our soldiers will be put on the line. But when it is to be fitted in the overall discussion how to get more effective and decisive decision taking, then we're willing to discuss it. But there is this caveat of not deciding for us without us.
Thank you. And Mr. Gammelgaard, you would like to comment?
Maybe just picking up a few of the points here also on the issue of constructive abstention, which of course is a sensitive issue, but it's no secret that of course this is also one of the things that are discussed now in relation to the European or the European peace facility, because one of the main problems in relation to the European peace facility is exactly that maybe some countries are not happy about contributing in various ways to the funding of lethal weapons. So the whole idea of that when we assist countries, particularly in Africa, that we, as part of this assistance, then also contribute with actually the means in terms of military equipment. For some countries, this is very sensitive. I think interesting enough, from the Danish perspective, we see this as a very good thing, because if we want to make these countries ready to cope with their own regional problems, they would need the equipment to do this. So we see this as kind of logical, and there was also the kind of what our Parliament agreed about on this issue, which is also interesting, I think. But of course, then it comes in. Okay, could those that are not very happy about this then actually make use of the constructive abstention? But there's a whole issue of funding, because well, should they then not contribute to the funding? So that makes it quite a difficult issue. And maybe picking up also on Christian's issue about not being maybe ready to actually contribute with resources to the decisions that we make. And I think that is really what we see as one of the absolute main problems. Sometimes it's too easy simply to make the political decision without having point A, B, and C following this. So the implications, meaning that if you kind of are in favor of making mission A, B, and C, then you should also be ready to then put in place the human resources and other resources. So there, it's very much up to nations themselves that they need to have in place kind of mechanisms to make this possible. I think on the civilian side, we're working on this nationally. It's not easy. There are many issues included, but I think that's part of it. Maybe on one word on the whole issue of European Security Council as well, because again, a very sensitive, interesting issue. But at least one interesting aspect of this is, of course, keeping the United Kingdom somehow engaged still. I think that might be behind this, and it was mentioned by others that the UK also is involved in the European Intervention Initiative. So as a kind of a means of keeping the UK involved, we believe this is important. Whether it should be, for other reasons, should be a European Security Council, I think that's of course a hot issue, because who are going to be members of this, and what about the smaller countries, which is a big issue. I'll leave it here.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the audience? Yes, we have one over here. We also have a microphone coming your way. And if you could please state your name and your affiliation, if any.
Yes, hello. My name is Uffe Hvidkjær. I'm from the Danish United Nations Association. Thank you for a very interesting event. I have two short questions. It's about the European Commission. Ursula von der Leyen said we need a more geopolitical commission. So do you think during this year with the new commission that the EU has been more geopolitical? And then for the Markus, the German presidency, what does it mean to have the presidency in the EU to improve things in the right direction? Thank you.
Thank you. And the first question is to...
That's in general, so...
Anyone who wants to pick it up. Yeah. Actually, shouldn't you also be on the stage? So you can also answer questions. And if we could have another chair as well. Are there other questions for this round? If I may then squeeze in a question also. So you have one? Yes.
Smaller countries, you spoke a little bit in your presentation. First you mentioned France and Germany. We need France and Germany to move this forward. But then also we have other countries being active, and the Netherlands is one. And then both Jørgen and you talked about smaller countries. Then I'm actually quite curious about what is the role of the smaller countries in this development. And I think I posed it to both of you, both Rob, Netherlands, and also to Jørgen. Because Jørgen, what is your response to Christine's presentation, saying that actually with the opt-out, Denmark loses influence in this development? How do you see that from the point of view of the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Whoa, that's a tough one.
Excellent. Okay, so maybe Kasper, how's it going with the the typing of the questions? So maybe while that link is being made, we could start with the physical participants. We had a question about the European Commission being geopolitical, and then we have no. Then we have a question about, I'm standing like this now, the role of small countries. And then we will move to the role of the presidency, which was directed to Germany. So if, Christine, would you like to?
Why not? I think this is on. Yes, so in terms of the new Commission President's ambition of having a geopolitical commission. Sort of at a general level, it is a new and a very big thing that the Commission is stating this ambition, since the Commission has traditionally not been involved in these kind of issues, at least not when it comes to defense. So the fact that the member states have actually agreed on spending money on defense sort of underlines or emphasize that the Commission will be able to move in the direction. Nevertheless, there is often a but when we talk about the EU's security and defense ambitions. We have seen how the budget, the numbers that the member states have actually agreed on spending on defense issues, such as the defense fund, but notably also military mobility. And the European Peace Facility is much lower in reality than was sort of promised or hoped by the European Commission. So the ambitions is definitely there. The reality is one which is sort of making those ambitions more difficult for the Commission to meet. Just a quick note on Christian's comment in terms of the difficulties that the EU has had on force generation for the CSDP missions, and it is very noticeable that we have so few numbers actually employed, and as Jørgen Gammelgaard also said, the actual value of the CSDP missions is rather limited. It is not large-scale missions, and for example the ones that NATO deploys, we cannot compare the two, and that is definitely the reality of the EU ability in terms of operations. Here I think we should remember that I think if we look at the ambitions of the EU in moving their security and defense policy forward, we should look more at this new ambition of capabilities, the EU wishing to develop military capabilities, the EU looking inwardly on sort of strengthening military cooperation within Europe. I think that is much more promising than when it comes to their ambitions to deploy outside Europe. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mikkel, would you like to comment?
In that case, I'll jump in on what can small states do, and I think whether it be in an EU context or in a NATO context, I think, well, the fact of the matter is that there is a limit to how much a small country can do on its own, and this is why small countries need these organizations. So of course, what role can the small countries play? The small countries. Of course, there's an element of reacting to what the great powers are doing. Which kind of initiatives are the great powers launching, be it in NATO or be it in the EU or being it outside these frameworks. But beyond that, actually, I think that this is important to remember, of course, that the small countries can play and should play a role in trying to mobilize partners for their own ideas for contributing. So that would be what should we say, the optimistic, more sort of proactive part of being a small country in these organizations, that there is actually room for trying to mobilize partner support and great power support for own ideas.
Thank you. And Jørgen Gammelgaard, would you like to comment as well?
Yes, thank you. Maybe not that easy questions, but maybe just on the issue of what the implications of the opt-out for the Danish influence in the European Union, of course, on which of course you made the DIIS made the report last year, and of course concluded that over the past 10 years the implications are gradually growing, and depending on what other developments will appear, it is likely that this will increase in the foreseeable future. But I think at the same time, it was a part of this of the report was also that, well, when it really comes to real security issues and the national security of Denmark, then it did not really matter. So on one hand, and maybe it does not matter that much, at least to the Danes. It matters, I think, quite a lot, of course, to diplomats working on these issues. And I think the point made that that one element is certainly that with the increased complexity, it's getting more and more difficult to kind of navigate and find the Danish position, whether we can participate in a new activity or not, and that can consume so much time that we do not have enough time to look at the real substance. I think we're really working on this. I think that's one of the main things that we focus on, how we can kind of cope with this. I think we managed actually quite well now with the European Peace Facility, and what we fairly quickly found out, yes, we could, under certain circumstances, participate, and now we can focus on the substance. So there is kind of a little bit of a learning element. So there is some consequences, but we can become better at coping with those. And maybe just in general on the role of small countries, and it is clear that it is exactly the reason why we like kind of multilateralism and international structures. That, of course, relatively the role of the small countries gets bigger inside. Of course, you sometimes have to accept decisions that you do not like, but in general, you actually gain more influence also on this issue. I hope this kind of.
That's a very good point. Thank you. Ambassador Sagman, would you like to comment, and particularly focusing on the role of small countries, please?
Yeah. Well, what's been said so far about that is are things that I could fully subscribe to. When I mentioned France and Germany, I didn't say France and Germany on their own. I think, I'm looking to my German colleague now, that certainly in our relationship with Germany, we've always felt that Berlin had open ears for everything the smaller surrounding countries said. They need as broad a base as possible to move the European Union forward on all aspects of European integration, so to speak. We have our own perspectives. I just had a look, and I happen to have an early copy with me of a non-paper that Denmark and the Netherlands drew up on strengthening the industrial base in the defense industry. And that was an idea that we came up with. I'm not quite sure what the latest state of play there is, but it has to do with the way that we look at industry. So it's we have different perspectives, and we contribute those to the European discussions, not just in the security and defense field, but also in many other aspects. If I make just a jump to the financial field, the EU budget, so to speak, the famous or infamous Frugal Four are an example of a grouping of smaller countries with which was punching above its weight, to use the British expression, not to everybody's liking, but it is a way of influencing debates when it comes to the vital interests of the smaller countries. And to return to my remarks on the Security Council, the European Security Council, we have to keep an eye out for our vital interests as small countries. Our citizens would not accept handing over our sovereignty, lock, stock and barrel, to 2 or 3 big sisters inside the European Union. Can I just pick up on the geopolitical commission question as well? We never liked the expression which the Commission itself introduced into the discussion. The European Union as a whole should be much more of a geopolitical actor. We must, not just in the field of economic security, and I said economic, that's what I was going to, security and defense, the economic field, we have to recognize the world for what it is, a dark forest with lots of baddies out there, and we need to get our act together, also for the time that the US is going to distance itself more from Europe, because China is dominating thinking there, the bipartisan thinking and other developments. So Europe as a geopolitical actor, yes, but should it be the European Commission which is then at the steering wheel? We think not. We think it is the collectivity of member states which should be in the driving seat. So in that sense, we don't like the words geopolitical commission. They can use it if they like, but they will not be taking over. One extreme example of what that geopolitical commission might look like is developed by the Social Democrats in Germany, who came up with a paper the other day proposing the establishment of a small army, they call it, under the command of the European Commission. That will be, first of all, it's only a party, or perhaps even a committee within the party which is proposing that, but that goes in a direction which we are not willing to contemplate. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. We now move on to the virtual part of the panel, and that will be the closing round as we are approaching the end of the seminar. So if any of the virtual panelists would like to comment on the questions, and if I may just slip in something to Markus Falke, in addition to, or as part of the question that he got about the role of the presidency, if you could also perhaps speak to how the Security Council, which has been brought up a couple of times, how that features in your work with the presidency. And now the chat works the magic.
Okay, so now up to me. Thank you. So perhaps I start with the Security Council. Of course, this was a unique opportunity for Germany to have at the same time the EU Council presidency and being in the UN Security Council. And of course, it plays an important role, for example, on Libya, where we have been very much engaged, of course, on a national level, but of course in the EU side, on the EU, and of course we now have been a lot closer in some issues. For example, we're heading the UN sanctions panel on Libya, so we really were there as well in the first row. And this is, of course, for like our French or British French is always the case, for us not. So of course that makes difference and put it a bit closer there as well, and help us try to work to think all these levels and layers as well together. On the question, say European Army, this 28th Army, well, this is really, I would totally agree with Robert said, a bit far-fetched. On geopolitical commission and what has happened, of course, we should not forget COVID. And there I come to a bit the German presidency. Of course, we had a COVID presidency as the poor Croatians before us. And of course, this just one very practical thing, besides what we do right now, of course, seeing us just on virtually, this means as well in Brussels, even if you can meet with keeping the distance, you're down like to 10% of meeting capacity. And what is done right now is only multi-annual financial framework. The COREPER is just doing this, nothing else. So, of course, we like this as kind of in a normal context. There's so much more we would have, or we would have been able to do in a certain way, no? And doing workshops and doing all these kind of things we do today in a certain way. And of course, and we see we really lack this to meet. And this is all what is diplomacy about: meeting, seeing people, getting like understand, overcome this perhaps perceptions or ideology, and understand what is really behind, and listen. So now and that's part of the presidency role on a lot of issues. It's about listening to everyone. And perhaps just to end there, a lot of things I think we discussed today. So it's not so much about substance. It's about mindset. And so there's this question of ambitious versus perhaps realistic or inclusive. So of course, yeah, Germany always was on the inclusive side. So it's our role to keep this thing together, and of course to try to find compromise. But this does not mean lowest common denominator. So in particular, as well as a presidency, you have to be very ambitious because you want to reach goals, and this costs so much energy. But it's necessary, and this is the role. And of course, there you can make a difference. And just to put perhaps 2 examples, civilian CSDP. We started 2 years ago, basically, with workshops, kind of trying to change what I said, the mindset, because this was something, it was felt like, oh, this is so, it's so difficult, it's this Brussels, oh no, and it was kind of this CivCom bubble. And so we tried to get the member states and the capitals engaged. And I think this worked. And now with the compact and all the process we have there, it's really, so it's totally, it's a different, not just dynamic. So you have this kind of sense of there's a family working together for a goal. And so if you put energy and as well kind of conviction in it, this makes a difference. And the second example, just of course, our last little kind of presidency victory on say the third state party, PESCO participation. You all knew this was kind of blocked for 2-3 years, and as well. So it was very, very sensitive to strike a balance there. And so it was not just, of course, about the big ones. It was listen to a lot of smaller member states there as well, and try then to get them on board. And so it cost us really like weeks of work, and we talked to all capitals about that, constantly, instantly and well, we kind of managed. And there, of course, you see. So of course, presidency has a role. Say without COVID, I think as well we would have done more, but now I see it as what Jürgen already said. So let's be optimistic. The glass is more than half full, and there again, it's about mindset. And the EU is a lot better as well on security and defense than some of the perceptions are inside EU, but as well outside.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we await in excitement who the next speaker will be. No one else? So they said nothing. Okay, excellent. Well, that puts us in the very final stage of the seminar, which is that Ambassador Sagman would like to have the floor.
Thank you, Jessica. Once again, thank you, Christian, for hosting us. Thank you, audience, for your patience. Almost everybody is still here. I'm quite relieved by that. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the panelists, actually, both the virtual ones, the avatars up there, and the physical ones here, and to express my gratitude in a more physical way. I have something that I would like to hand over to you. One at a time. Of course, it's all propaganda, right? Okay. But since we were talking about small states, and that goes for the two of us, I thought to improve the knowledge in Denmark and other places about my small state, I have here a book about the history of the Netherlands, written for a general public, and it should help you to understand my country better and where all the things that I said today have come from. I can hand them over to the physical panelists right here. And do not worry or be worried, there will a book be coming your way through the mail.
Nice bag.
Yes. Thank you very much for your... Oh yes, we've got more. They are for Jessica?
It's for the panelists, right?
Yeah.
So we can...
Okay, we can do that later. Okay, cool. Sorry. We will send you. So thank you once again. It's been a very nice hybrid experience for all of us. Get home safely, I would say. Keep your distance, but do keep coming to DIIS's excellent seminars and webinars as well, because there's one coming up about Baltic security, I understand, under your leadership. Thank you again, DIIS. Thank you again, Danish audience.